What are the issues that have been raised against DNA evidence? And I've listed them here, and I will provide the answers. Actually, the Supreme Court has provided the answers. DNA testing violates right to remain silent and the right against self-incrimination. DNA testing violates right to privacy, and DNA testing involves application of ex post facto law. Okay. First of all, the right to remain silent and the right against self-incrimination. This is the right, and this can be used by the defense. It can happen to you when you've got a suspect, and they will say, no, I will not provide a biological sample because I have a right not to give evidence against myself, the right against self-incrimination. However, the Supreme Court has already ruled. You have to get your lawyer to read the case, because the Supreme Court has ruled in People versus Yatar, Herrera versus Alba, and Agustin versus Court of Appeals that the right to remain silent and the right against self-incrimination refers only to testimonies. In other words, when the court orders a suspect to provide a biological sample, it doesn't violate his right against self-incrimination. That's very powerful. And that's the argument that the defense always uses, generally uses when they are ordered to provide a sample. So again, the Supreme Court has ruled. DNA evidence does not involve a search or communication. The right to privacy is not intended to stifle scientific and technological advancements that enhance public service and the common good. So this issue of the right to privacy, I own my DNA, therefore I am entitled to my own genetic privacy. Yes, but you are at this stage in court and you are violating somebody else's privacy, so it's not intended to stifle scientific and technological advancement. In fact, the good lawyers have argued that if it's really not you, then DNA evidence will also say so. So again, cite Agustin versus Court of Appeals, a decision in 2005. And then the Supreme Court ruled, this ex post facto, now with the lawyers here, you better give me a hand. Ex post facto law is applying a law now to situations before that, where the law did not exist. So there was an argument that how can you use law that was only promulgated in 2007 when the case has been ongoing since 2001 or 2004, etc. So it says that there is no ex post facto law involved. The science of DNA typing involves the admissibility, relevance, and reliability of the evidence obtained under the rules of court. In fact, the argument here in People versus Yatar is the rules of evidence have always been in existence since the rules of court had been around. So it's not 2007, it's the rules of court. The rules of DNA evidence only expanded or explained what was already contained in the rules of court, and therefore it is not a violation of the ex post facto. Okay, so that is the DNA and Philippine justice part. Do I just proceed with the technology now that I've laid the foundation? Any question po so far?
You mentioned with the females.
Yes, ma'am.
For the male. What about male?
Okay. When we have when the victims are male. Okay. And we've done some of them. We've got male, or male victim, female perpetrator. That not very many, but there are some. We analyze if it's a male situation, then when we target the male-specific DNA, we're dealing with mixtures because they're both males. There's another panel of DNA markers that we test, which is what we call autosomal DNA markers. These are the DNA that we share that both men and women have. And so the analysis becomes more complex because we have to analyze mixture samples. So there's a major contributor and a minor contributor, and we have to be able to try to determine which is male victim, and male perpetrator, etc.
What about, can you do effective DNA testing on hair? Or does it have to carry the follicle?
Here, our lab has not been very successful with hair. It's our lab at UP. But there had been a number of papers that have used hair, particularly even with cut hair. Cut hair is not the best sample, the cut hair, especially cut dyed hair, because it has additional chemicals. If you're dealing with hair, the best ones would be the ones with follicle, because the roots still have DNA. This part, a lot of that is protein, and there are trace amounts of what we call mitochondrial DNA. However, there had been other laboratories that had been successful in other countries that had been able to use it. I would suggest that if there are other samples, it would be better to try to get the other samples. But sometimes you don't have that choice. Okay, so now we'll look at DNA technology, which is what Amihan had asked me to cover here. Here, I'd like to acknowledge, of course, DNA Pro Kids. I'll talk a little bit about DNA Pro Kids, but this is their website. DNA Pro Kids was started by Dr. Jose Lorente at the University of Granada in Spain, and Dr. Arthur Eisenberg at the University of North Texas in the US. So the main objective of DNA Pro Kids was to actually network different DNA laboratories all over the world, so that we can help help fight or combat child trafficking using DNA evidence. So we've done a few for Amihan and her team. We've done a few for DSWD, but as I was emailing Amihan, it's already 2015, and I've done only one for the year. So we've been provided with some chemicals. At this stage, I don't know for how long, but at this stage, we can still offer the DNA test for free because we have those chemicals that were provided by our sponsors. But my concern here is we have not been giving the numbers for the past 3 years when we've started this, so I don't know for how long that they will can help us. Alright, so the objectives of this presentation is to provide an overview of DNA forensics, discuss the use of DNA tests in investigating child trafficking cases. The reason why I focus on child trafficking cases is because DNA Pro Kids actually allows us to use the chemicals that they've donated to us for potential child trafficking cases. Now, if it's a woman that already older, we need to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. For example, and we've been allowed to do this, if a woman was trafficked when she was 12 years old, now the case is up, she's already 25, but when there's evidence that to show that she was trafficked when she was 12, then we had been allowed to use those donations for her case. So things like that. Or for example, if the traffic victim is somebody with that is not mentally 100% as the mind of a child, then she also qualifies to be able to be included here. So there are ways to try to see if we can be of assistance. But then the principles of the DNA test, whether it's child or woman, is still the same. And then there are challenges in using the DNA technology. All right. So here, Amihan, you're there.
This is an old picture. This is the
I don't know. I pulled it up from the internet.
Wilberforce Award.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, it was on an award website. All right. So now let's just go to the basic definitions because we've been assuming that people know, but let's just make sure that we do know. What is DNA? DNA is the acronym for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a chemical and the genetic blueprint of all living organisms. These are shots of microorganisms, bacteria, of plants, of animals, and of course humans. And when we say humans, and when we say alive or once alive, because one doesn't lose your DNA upon death. So there's a period of time where of course there is what we call decomposition, but it's not an immediate thing. So it gives us a bit of time to do some of our analysis in order to identify the body, for example, or to evaluate the case. Yes,
When
ma'am.
you say it gives you a bit of time, it has a prescription period.
Yes, ma'am. It has
So your
prescription.
DNA blueprint is not normal.
If it is, to answer that question, is the DNA blueprint immortal? It depends on how it is stored or how it is handled. One big challenge that we've got in the Philippines is that because of our tropical and humid climates, if samples are left out in the open, such as in an abandoned crime scene, yes, ma'am, microorganisms actually eat DNA. We know this. These microorganisms, to be able to have their food, particularly soil bacteria, that's where they get their food, is decaying organic matter, such as plants, animals, and humans. So with the tropical climate, 30 degrees, etc., 35 degrees, microorganisms actually multiply very fast. And the more microorganisms you've got in the soil, the more would eat any of the remains that you've got. Now, if, for example, the samples, and this is what, for example, Dr. Raquel Fortun, in her morgue at UP Manila, she's got freezers, body freezers now in her morgue. Not very many, but she's got body freezers. So, she is able to, for a certain period of time, only because of the limitation of space, she's able to put, you see it even in the hospitals, before the embalming process when a person dies, and before you can transfer the body to the funeraria, they have the freezers.
Yes,
Diba? For the bodies there. So if the bodies and the samples are in the cold, they can practically be immortal, which is what we found. If you've read European cases, like the Pyrenean man in the ices of Italy, why? Because there are ice on the ground. We don't have the same condition. So that's one challenge
So
for us.
what happened in Tacloban, the bodies? Were they collecting DNA to identify for themselves?
Actually, they did. Let's refer to them in their proper term. The National Bureau of Investigations collected samples from the Tacloban victims. In fact, we had them last January. So Tacloban was 2 years ago. We had them last January in our lab because I've got a Fulbright scholar here at the moment until April. She's Filipino, and she was a DNA scientist in New York, and one of the prime people who did the World Trade Center disaster identification. So we pulled her in. We had her teach the NBI sent about 6 or 7 of their people from NBI to learn how to do DNA testing, and we were able to generate DNA profiles. However, the bigger challenge there is that NBI is telling us they have not been provided with the chemicals to be able to continue their work. So we covered the samples that they did. I covered it in one of my research grants, but I cannot do 6,000. So
They were able to collect that?
no, I don't think they collected 6,000. I think what they did, and this is all in the disaster victim plan, is that, and this is our argument also, and we support this very much, Dr. Fortun also the same. When you do a macroscopic examination, particularly in the early days, once identified, you really may not need to do DNA testing because there's evidence already to prove.
Yes.
But you have to get there on time, because after
Yeah.
3 days, if the bodies are submerged in water,
Yeah, most of them are.
which because of the type of disaster, then
Yeah.
it's submerged in water, one on top of the other, the humid climate, they go very fast.
Yes.
So you cannot distinguish. As we were saying, it's really a big thing to be able to train ground people, to do it fast. So I don't know how many they were able to identify that time, but the others that were not identified have been samples. I think they cut here, about 3 centimeters. We were also having some of the occipital bones, which are parts of the. So there are samples that have been collected, and I think they are stored in a cone. I don't know where cold, but cold. And the ones that we analyzed at the beginning of this year, are
Walang brown out.
hopefully. Or brownout, konti lang. In the summer, we're going to have many brownouts. But the ones that we did earlier this year, we got 7 profiles, full profiles. Problem is, I don't know if there's antemortem data from the relatives.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of challenges. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, doctor, how much is the cost for DNA testing? Because some of them said
It's very expensive.
very costly.
It's very, very expensive. It is highly dependent on the type of biological sample that was submitted for DNA testing. So for this I can say, for our standard filiation test, alleged father, mother, and child, all blood samples or saliva samples, we can do that for 45,000.
That's the
Paternity.
paternity.
Because we're doing blood sample,
Yeah.
it's clean, it's straightforward.
Right.
For bone samples, particularly those that we exhume, it can cost 100,000 or so. Because the chemicals are very, very expensive. The ones that we've done for the SWD, the chemicals have been donated. So we have now, we've covered the operational expenses, some of the other chemicals that have not been donated, but that was covered by our sponsors. So we did not charge the SWD or the OJ for those cases when we did them. So, now we're looking at, and this is something we're working with some of our partners. For example, the dead person, it becomes very expensive, and this we're telling our partners on the ground. It becomes expensive if I have to do bones from a body, particularly bones that have bones from bodies have already been embalmed. Because the introduction of formaldehyde or formalin in a body actually allows decreases our likelihood of getting successful DNA profiles. It's an artificial chemical. So we're saying get to us before. Now, and this is something we are trying to see if it is possible. When you have a mass disaster, say the magnitude of Yolanda, you know, if I had trained people there already, you don't need to DNA profile naman agad eh. You don't need to do it immediately. But you need to collect the samples. If you have 500, you have 100 bodies there, tag them and have a medical doctor collect blood samples. Boom, boom, boom in your vacutainer tubes. Just tag them. We may not need to profile them, but at least you have the blood. I don't have to have a saw. It's really on a planning thing. But again, the challenge of I guess you encounter it all the time. The challenge of being able to introduce that as part of a map in terms of DVI is big. So, anyway,
But actually, we should think about that there's a disaster
Protocol.
DVR. Risk reduction.
that's one thing, because you know, I remember I was even emailing you, Mihan. I wanted to go to Yolanda and Sendong. Sige, okay, maybe NBI is doing the groundwork, but what I was concerned with was with the children. Because we were emailed by our DNA Pro Kids collaborators, is that in their experience in Haiti, there had been groups that had been saying they are relatives of the children, and particularly in the magnitude of Haiyan and Sendong, when you've got your immediate family wiped out, the children might not really realize who their extended relatives are. And you may have and there are likely unscrupulous people there claiming children. Now, with our technology now, there are ways to actually evaluate whether a person claiming to be an extended aunt of a child, we can evaluate that. And if it's really related, then give the child, if that's how TSWD evaluates the case. But we will provide that information. If they are not related, then that's something else. So those things we were saying that those are ways that DNA Pro Kids at least could have helped. But I emailed several of the DSWD, I wasn't getting an answer.
So everybody was
Flat out, I guess.
they
So
couldn't think about this.
yeah. So the issues of children over DV disasters are actually a major issue.
But I think those who were there during the Typhoon Yolanda, they were just based for a while in the streets until we decided to, bury, common grave because at the church, because, they smelled awful na. Yeah,
But that's why
and
what I
thinking
say,
of the,
that if we had that technology,
Yeah.
if people knew that all you have to do is get the medical,
Yeah.
the blood samples.
And put in the
And the
And
doctors
then-
are able to do it already because it's the same technology, the newborn screening.
Oh,
When a
yeah,
baby
yeah.
gets born,
Oh,
here at the
yeah.
hill,
Yeah.
and you put it in the same card, you've got somebody like that.
Yeah.
But you need leadership eh.
Yeah.
Somebody and then you get it in cards, and the cards have their specific preservative chemicals already that goes very well. And it's cards, you have one box and you've got 100 samples already. And that would save the government so much money. And of course, the quickness of being able to analyze
Yeah.
that and compare it to, and then the humanitarian resolution of those. I guess those are
Yeah.
bigger scales.
Yeah, but we really need to advocate for that kasi I think when there's such disasters, all you would need is those sample
The medical
cards
doctors.
and then the picture and then you put it together.
Yeah,
That's
digital
file 1,
picture,
body A,
digital
body
photo.
1, and so on.
Because when I was in Sendong, I
That's
went to
right.
Sendong, in Cagayan, we were in Iligan. I guess this is something that we need to address. When I was in Sendong, even the medical students were asking us how can we help. They wanted to, they were there with us, except that there are policies and politics that we could not jump over, and of course we couldn't do what we thought would be logical to do because of those reasons. But we had doctors, medical students and doctors just wanting to do, Mom, how can we help?
I think we have to say, parang can we put like a kit that explains how to do it, that we can easily disseminate in an area where there's a disaster. Of course, baka the medical students have to be more, they should be busy with the first aid of all the living, But if we can delegate some of them, kasi this becomes a threat to the living, the dead bodies. It becomes also for the
For
hazard,
disease, yeah.
health hazard. So that's why we need to do this very quickly. Aside from being, it's more scientific, I mean, it's easier to manage, but at the same time, also easier to decide what to do with the bodies. Because I think that was a big dilemma in Hayat.
One
was,
thing though,
was who can make the decisions about when to do the very.
I mean, I just so that just from experience, and this is good, but there are challenges, and I don't know how your group could be able to overcome this. You remember that Dr. Fortune was on the ground,
Yeah.
and she was told to leave
Because of the NDI. There was a
Yeah.
because of the other
Yeah, there was a turf
turfing issue.
Yeah. there was
So
a-
she was already there. She was already with the bodies. She was already filling up the forms, and she was told to leave. So
So maybe if you could elevate this and scale it up to the level of policy that's
Yeah, maybe that's
independent
what
of
we-
proprietary
yeah.
provenance, and just
Ah.
tell them this is
yeah,
protocol for
coordinate.
science
That's right.
already, right?
And this is the reason why I would like to have, I'm a scientist now.
I would like to have one.
To have partners who would try to effect policies.
Yeah.
For example, when we worked with the Philippine Judicial Academy on the rule of DNA evidence, I mean, I don't know, this is one reason why I went into science. I don't understand politics very much. Really, I don't understand. All of a sudden, I hear this comment and I said, I didn't do that. It comes out. So it kind of doesn't work well with me. But the thing there is, with the rule of DNA evidence, we were able to make it happen because the Chancellor of the Philippine Judicial Academy at that time, Chancellor Marfina Herrera, was actually backing it up. So she was sending us, come on, email, the draft, where is the draft, where are the definitions, I need to have this meeting, and then she was able to work with the Supreme Court. Wala na kami, we disappeared, we were not at the forefront, we were not interested to be at the forefront. But she was the one who forefronted in front of the Supreme Court, justices, and was able to make it happen. So I think that's what I'm saying here, is that we need champions maybe from your group to be able to advocate in terms of policies, even on a child and woman
Yeah, I
issue.
think that's what I was thinking.
We can provide you with the technology.
On with the Save the Children, World Vision, all these big ones that are doing
Disaster.
Disaster
DRR.
Disaster
Yeah, we have to
management.
get them together, and then we have to make a policy proposal. What has to be changed, and then with their help, maybe we could get it higher up on the political agenda, because I think these disasters are going to happen
All the
again
time.
and again. So we need to have this in place. How are we going to deal with this?
Yeah. And also even the issue of how the whole thing is managed. When we were in Sindong, there was only one number. The poor health officer was the only person managing, could only call this guy. You've got the entire 2 cities, we're calling one guy. The poor guy may not have slept. So it was not proper planning delegation.
That's
Mm-hmm.
I see this in a lot of
right.
situations.
Top-down mentality.
No, because you have to have 2 things. There are at least 2 things I see. The children who are orphaned, those without, who we need to protect, and then the ones who died, that are related.
And even, for example, we were already addressing this, although because we were addressing the issue of antemortem samples. I was talking to Chancellor Padilla, now Chancellor Padilla, Carmencita Padilla, with the newborn screening. They've been doing newborn screening for 17 years. I know where those cards are. They are in their office in the PGH. I said, I can do 17 years of children's antemortem sample if DOH allows us to. You get the newborn cards of Cagayan de Oro and Iligan City, for example. They're there. The blood samples are there. If allowed to identify the body of children, which we've seen in Sendong, we can compare and identify. I mean, you see the kids; they're small. You can already differentiate by body bag. These are the kids. I get the newborn screening cards, if allowed, by the Department of Health. Those newborn cards without any problem. Then we can compare, then identify, and finish. It's pretty straightforward for me. But that suggestion didn't take off the ground. And that's for any place in the Philippines,
Because if you can safeguard, where those cards are kept, that's actually the DNA of all the people. I mean,
of all the children that
gets
gets born.
How many? 17
Well, that was in 2011. So now would be
14 years.
14 years.
Yeah.
That's 4.
Yeah.
21 years.
So if we're doing the newborn screening systematically for all children, by a certain time we would have the DNA samples of practically everyone.
They're not
Of a
being
certain age.
they're not being profiled. They're not being DNA profiled because there are
No,
genetic
but no
issues.
need. But as long
But
as we know that they're there,
They're there.
identified.
And then if DOH allows us to use it for secondary use because of a disaster, then
The
that
records.
Consequence. Yes.
Yes.
Is this being done anywhere in demographics?
Do they have DNA samples?
Disaster risk
They compare it with
Disasters.
Is it mandatory? Newborn screening is already mandatory, right?
It's by law.
Yeah.
By law. I think there's even kaya you can actually charge it to your field health.
Yep.
Could that potentially also be used for locating missing children? Like one of the big issues we deal with, Bahatuli, and we deal with all kinds of children in difficult circumstances. We often have children that come to us that we just cannot locate family, particularly when they're special children. We have an autistic child at the moment found in the street, and it's very, very difficult to find family. So is there a possibility that, like, if that kind of profiling happened, that you could use it then to...
Okay, there might be legal issues here because if we are looking for, we propose setting up a missing persons database. The Department of Social Welfare and Development, remember they've got the missing person, the child database. So we ask them if they can just put a little box. If ever we have found anything and we've profiled anybody there, we just take it. And we've got ways to do searches. However, now with your question of can we use the DNA of those children to find, to identify your kids, your kids, we will have to profile all of them. We have to set up a database.
Yeah.
That could be an issue for many people because their kids' profile could be there. And then if it's not properly guarded, databases. I remember going to Virginia in 2006, talking to FBI, and then Congressman Tanyada III was with us, and one of the key issues he had been bringing up is who will be in charge of the Philippine database? Who will the population trust enough to trust their database? So that could be, I mean, we could do specific questions, but it may not be the whole lot for that.
I'm just thinking, could it be part of the national NSO? Meaning that if we have the identity of the people there who got their clearances, couldn't it be, could it be part as well of the data that could be included there?
One, it's very expensive, but secondly, we've had difficulties. I wrote a whole chapter on this. I think I shared this already with you. I wrote a chapter on this for Cambridge University Press, trying to understand why even a unified ID. We had problems in 2005. Remember the time Arroyo, even Fidel Ramos were saying, let's combine our IDs and have a unified ID, like Malaysia has a registered citizen number, and there were many challenges in Congress and in the Senate. And one thing that was coming out in the readings that I was doing was that, this big Uncle Sam in the background, also martial rule was a big thing, that we are so guarded with, there's just an element of distrust of the authorities.
Nobody wants to disclose.
Because who will protect my sample? Who will protect my profile? If now they've got it, will they plant my profile or sample somewhere? So that's why we're saying, and I was discussing this with Congressman Tanyag at the time, there are ways to be able to protect samples, there are ways to protect databases we cannot limit, but that has to be discussed in a bigger group that never eventually. But there are ways around it, except that there has to be a real leadership to be able to do it.
Well, sige, that's about a general picture of the whole. But what about for the children? Because I am also part of the Intercountry Adoption Board, and there's so many cases there are foundlings.
Yes,
Foundlings, and we don't really know parents how to connect with it before they're given a protection.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. We've done some cases for the stability, where, of course, no names mentioned, but where in the investigation, which of course we do not interfere, we just answer the questions of disability. But when disability communicates to us the purpose for the test, essentially in their investigation they found mother selling child number 9. She's got 1 to 8. The reason being to feed 1 to 8, sell number 9, etc. And so what they were doing, meron yung certificate.
Certificate of founder.
So that they can go let the child be for legal adoption rather than for
legal
adoption. So we prove, and in some instances it was really the mother, but in some instances wasn't the mother. So there's an additional kidnapping charge involved. Why are you in possession? So Singaporean. Okay, so those are issues that have to be addressed. Now, it can be, and I've been trying to get to the Interagency Adoption Board, because what we were saying is that in Guatemala, one of the partners of Daily Pro Kids, Guatemala across the border, U.S. So what they've been doing is that they actually have a Kenneth law, I've got it here, where all children for adoption, they actually require DNA test.
But they found a way around that.
They found a way around it. Kaya nga we made it more sensitive. So what happened where, but DNA test, the baby would be tested with mother. What they found eventually, after a while, they found that they needed photos of the child, because mother would bring her own child. Would test, and of course everything okay. But when adoption time comes, would bring the other child.
How they
and smuggle the other child. Oh, she still has the other one. The poor child, I don't know how many times the child gets pricked. But anyway,
because it became a rule, because there was all this fraud with the adoption process, that there were women saying that this is their child, they're giving it up for adoption, and then the embassy would process it. So now the embassy required this DNA. But what they did now was bring your own child to get the DNA sample, and then bring another child to actually give up for adoption. So they found a way around it.
So now, as part of DNA Pro Kids, what happens here is that it's photo documented. The photo of the child is included, photo of the mother is included, etc., etc., etc. So those are things. And we're not even talking, so we're not even talking about cases of tissue trafficking, organ trafficking, where minors have been involved. Remember your case,
Yeah.
minors have been involved. So that's also some issues.